All right, folks, it's noon. I know we're still getting settled in. Please enjoy some pizza. The folks that are joining online, please feel free to turn your cameras on and interact with us. We'll do some Q&A at the very end, but you can drop questions in the chat. Before we get started, I just want to drop a couple of reminders too. I know it's the end of the semester, and this is our last public service perspectives of this fall semester. So thank you guys for coming out to all four this season. We will be sending some announcements out about the sessions we'll have in spring, but if you have any questions or recommendations, feel free to just email me directly. Would love your input and feedback on the public service perspective series as a whole. In 2 weeks, on December 13th, we have one more little gathering for all of us to get together before you all go off for winter break. So hope you can join us for our holiday potluck. That will be over in Building 21 on December 13th. I sent out an invite, but if you didn't get that, feel free to ping me after this session. At this time, I will go ahead and I will turn it over to Dr. Ani Rupu to introduce our awesome presenter today. Thank you all.
Thanks, Betty. So welcome everyone. I won't take more than 2 minutes. So I have the pleasure of having Sarah as a student.
Sorry.
And I guess, and I remember Sarah was working outside of the classroom on something to do with the farmers market. I don't have all the details, but I think it was a question of where is it going to move, doing some research around it. So we worked very closely, whatever way I could. But I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about how her journey has led her to where she is. I also want to acknowledge a form of potentially future alum who's sitting somewhere in that second row right there. So if you want to sell the program, please do. Sarah.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Mackenzie and Honey and all. I really this is great. It is like coming home. I was part of the executive MPA program, graduated in 2015. That was when my now 17-year-old daughter was maybe 6. I mean, doing rough math. It's been some time since I, had that experience and really, it was so foundational to what came next for me. So before I get into what I'm doing now, a brief timeline before this, I was after leaving my MPA, I established a nonprofit organization here in Athens County called Upgrade Ohio. And our focus was really driving demand and growing a renewable energy market here in Southeast Ohio. Stood that up and also kind of not shut it down so much as merged it with Rural Action, which is a regional economic development organization. And they took it on as a program area. So that was, sort of the 2016 through 2022 era of my life. And in the beginning of 22, I took a position with the Solar Energy Industries Institute, which is a nonprofit arm of SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. So we will dive into all of that, but again, thanks for anyone who's online. We'll do Q&A at the end. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll just dive right in here. So just to give you a little bit of a level set, SEIA is the largest trade association representing the solar industry in the US. They are 1,000 members strong, representing everything from manufacturers to installers to financiers and, everyone across the gamut in that solar supply chain. They work, excuse me, they work on federal, state, and local policy, advocating for the interests of the industry, a strong focus on climate and equity, driving for a justice focus across all sectors. They're really invested in the growth of the industry, and today we're going to talk a lot about what that industry growth looks like. They really drive policies. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Sarah.
To get some pizza if you need it.
Thank you.
Just getting started. Also, they look at how they can really support the growth of the manufacturing, trade, and technology within the solar industry. So broad picture here, SIA is the, sort of the largest representative of the industry in our country. So in 2022, SIA is a 501(c)(6) organization, a trade association, and they took a sort of strategic decision to launch a C3 organization, a nonprofit that will really kind of drive the policy lens, drive the public interest side of the industry, and really work kind of on behalf of those of us who are impacted by the industry, right? Like we really are trying not to simply represent the interests of members as much as this broader picture of what it means to grow our solar industry sustainably. So that gives you a kind of a quick background here. Before I go on, I remember I wanted to just sort of get a sense in the room. Who all here is sort of either currently working in or looking to work in sort of the energy sector broadly, clean energy sector more directly? Is that sort of a yes, Sarah? Great. Cool. So that's helpful to know that, this is perhaps sort of a newer, or, I'll try to tone my jargon down is what I'm realizing I need to do, and make sure that it's, this is digestible info. So big picture, we are in a rapid, accelerated moment. I think that, certainly internationally and definitely here in the US, to drive for the growth of the solar electric industry to comprise up to 20% of all electric generation by 2030. That's the goal that SIA set. I think it was in 2021 that this was sort of adopted. So with that framework, all of the initiatives and activities that SIA does is really pushing towards this goal. But how do we get there? What are the barriers in the way? That's the big question. So let's take some time now to sort of look into what the industry trends are and sort of how we can address this as we go. This is a busy slide, I apologize, but I wanted to give you just like some snapshot numbers here. A good big one to think about here is we've got about 5% of all US electricity coming from solar. And while that may not sound like a lot of our total energy generation in the States, it is almost 11 times its share from 10 years ago, right? So we're really, working at quite an accelerated pace already. This number continues to grow, the current employment. We'll talk a little bit more about that soon, but it's really a very robust industry. And that's a pretty conservative number, really. I mean, these are people working directly with solar, but there's, this whole tangential sort of support network outside of direct solar jobs. Also important to note that we're really, often you'll see this whenever people are talking about, what is the impact of this project or this initiative, like how much carbon emission reduction are we seeing? So, this stat in the center here, this 175 million metric tons, kind of looks at, that's a comparative from a baseline. Note that on here. I want to say this is a cumulative figure that has been tracked over time. So we're really looking at a pretty rapid decarbonization in a short period of time. Goals for US homes, we're looking at 15% home, and again, rooftop solar, and I feel like I should qualify this real quick. When we're talking about solar, there's kind of different segments, different sizes. There's a rooftop solar array, which is a home by home kind of system. There's solar that's on a more regional level, so we call that, or on a municipal level, there's municipal and commercial solar. That would be something on like a water treatment plant or, you know, a factory. There's also solar at a large scale, we call that utility scale solar. That's energy that's being fed directly into the grid and, you know, sold on a wholesale market. So, you know, just something to level set us a little bit here. So here we are looking at what this trend has been. We go back to 2010 where the market was pretty nascent. We're seeing, you know, an incredible increase, annual growth rate of 24%. You know, compared to a lot of industries and their growth, this is pretty astronomical. That is due to strong federal policies. The solar investment tax credit provides when you purchase renewable energy systems or equipment. There's a 30% tax credit. Number has changed a bit over the last decade, but these are all incentives that really kind of drive solar adoption. You can see in these sort of varying colors, you know, where the growth is most. And as I mentioned, that utility scale solar, those large systems that are, you know, over 10 megawatts or let's say over 20 acres of solar, to kind of put it in your mind. That's been one of the largest growth trend areas. Certainly that will continue. So, yeah, we're looking to reach sort of a nexus by, again, 2030. Our goal is 15%, and we're really on our way there.
What was that CS?
Yes.
Say it again. Yeah.
The CSP utility, the orange
orange
line, that
line,
stays
yeah.
pretty consistent from the.
Sure. CSP is, you know, that's a good question.
I think it's adding up, right? So it's the total.
Cumulative solar production.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not quite sure.
Isn't it concentrating solar? Something like that?
Well, there's concentrated solar power.
Yeah.
True. There's like
I
that.
wonder if that's what that was. Utility scale concentrated
That
solar
actually,
power
that makes the most sense.
as opposed to
yeah.
panel.
Yeah, because that generally is factored into sort of these. So, it's a good question. I can confirm. But that is a small share of the market, notably, like that's
Yeah.
not been, it's a huge upfront investment and hard to scale or have been a distributed strategy for. So how do we do this, right? T has really identified a reverse engineered strategy to get from 2030. Understanding that, you know, we've got these barriers that have been, you know, standing in the way. Passage of the landmark Inflation Reduction Act was a significant catalyst for growth, and really is pushing the game into a whole new territory. But there's still really a pretty sizable gap for implementation. So this one is notable here. I think one of the things I wanted to share about this is if we're understanding that, you know, baseline, this is sort of the do nothing or, you know, the forecast, if we were to, you know, act with sort of a status quo practice versus, you know, a more catalyzed investment in solar. And I think that, you know, it does speak to the fact that, you know, what seems to be the trend we're on now to really make these investments. I think there is some logic to and I guess hope in a strategy that reaches us to 2030. So let's remember that cost is always the leading driver. We've seen that solar costs have dropped more than 40% over the last decade. That's pretty incredible when you really think about it. solar is generally measured by like installed capacity, right? So how much does it cost to put in 1 watt of solar? I guess this chart is kind of using, this price per watt has come down quite significantly. On the residential side, we see the trend. Now, of course, the gap of 2020 to 2022, there's, the installations were certainly up, but then we had COVID, we had supply chain issues that were pretty significant drivers for decrease in installations, but generally this has started to track back into, a positive territory, and we're really seeing that these prices are levelizing again. So that's really exciting to know, and I think we expect that this trend will continue. Yes, inflation. Yes, all of the other drivers that come into play, but all things considered, I think this trend is going to continue. Yeah.
If you mentioned the inflation, you watched that.
Mhm.
You have a couple of how that affected you.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll go into that in some depth here in a moment, but yeah, it's such a key driver and a really important, part of why we're making, why we're seeing this shift. It's important to note that solar is certainly a 50-state market. Some states are, accelerating rapidly with their solar growth, and that's because they have policies that enable people to either, install rooftop, or they're really driving for these utility scale projects. And it's pretty fascinating to watch states like Florida, for example. 5 years ago, Florida was doing nothing, and now they're like, an incredible powerhouse for solar. California is kind of in a category of its own, right? They were, they have had enabling policies that have driven solar for more than a decade, and almost reaching a point of like, there are new problems that California faces that other states that haven't even, come close to their level of adoption, they now face. So I think it's an interesting case study in like, okay, this is what, a saturated solar market looks like. Lessons to learn from that is similarly in Texas, but it's not just solar, it's other renewables that are driving price changes and other market factors there. Ohio, notably, is a solar market growth state. We're not totally behind. At the same time, we're not doing ourselves any favors on the legislative side or on the policy side. We're really from a developer standpoint, the people who are coming to Ohio and saying, hey, what do you say we build here? They get really mixed market signals from our legislators, from the policies that we have here. And that's hard because solar requires this like stable 30-year horizon where you're like, okay, I'm expecting this project to make a return and really be a logical investment. And Ohio, unfortunately, hasn't been great at setting that market signal in place and really pushing. There's, and I won't go into this, but I'll mention it briefly. Currently in the House, here in Ohio, there's a bill to be adopted for community solar. Community solar is sort of like solar for everyone, right? If you don't have a roof, or you rent, or you're, otherwise unable to participate in the solar market directly, you can purchase a subscription to a community solar project, and it's a great way to support solar. And it's pretty successful in a lot of states that have adopted rules for that, and we're hopeful that Ohio does do that. It has good bipartisan support, and it's surprisingly, I say surprisingly just because we have a very corrupt legislative environment in our state for energy. So it's looking pretty good, but keep an eye on it. So policy drivers, here's where we get into the Inflation Reduction Act. So the IRA was incredibly landmark. I put some notes in my, well, it's all right, I can't see it here, but just to say this act was 380 some billion with a B in investment for clean energy projects as a driver for inflation reduction. And there's jobs in that, there's infrastructure development in that. And it has had, well, we're expecting it to have over the next, decades, but really in the last 18 months, we've seen, massive investment. Now, are those projects built yet? Not quite. Are the path towards those dollars actually translating into projects, I think is well set, and people are seeing a real solid use of it. Now, the government has had to figure out how to deploy this money, and that's been interesting to watch. It required the Treasury to, rework like their definitions of things like an energy community. Energy communities are where this money is targeted. And by definition, an energy community is a place that, has had a lot of impacts, adverse impacts due to energy production, due to pollution, due to, any number of factors as defined by the law. So point being, this federal investment should, and hopefully will, really reach those communities that have had the largest impact due to energy generation, fossil fuel usage over the years. So we're excited to see where this goes. Projections seem to suggest that we're going to see pretty sizable growth in the market due to this. All the same, there is a lot of headwinds, as we like to describe it. There's a number of things standing in the way. I will jump ahead and sort of give you the big pictures of this. One thing that I spend a lot of time doing in my job at SI2 is looking at what are the problems with interconnection and transmission. So on the electric grid, we've got poles and wires, substations, and a whole host of organizations whose job it is to make sure that the power that's being bought by this or generated here, reaching over here, going in all the directions it needs to go to, that the systems are built safely and reliably and under the right regulatory conditions. And so generally that's what I mean when I say interconnection. And the interconnection system was built for coal-fired generation plants, places that are not renewable energy sources. When you think about solar, you realize it's not a 24/7 system, right? When the sun goes down, you can't collect power. There are methods to address that, looking at battery storage and other systems, but really, the grid itself is not built for those new generation with solar and other renewables to really work. So we need to fix that, and we need to fix that rapidly, because there's a lot of projects waiting to be built, a lot of solar that wants to be built, but they can't really get on the grid with these old systems. Where do we put it? Land use and siting issues, that's a big deal. Consumer protection, this is weeding out some bad actors in the industry. There's been a really significant unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are, not installing quality systems, giving the industry a really bad name. And, there aren't really strong consumer protections on the books yet for this kind of emerging industry. Trade's a huge deal, like most panels come from China. We're trying to grow our, domestic market. How do we balance those two things? SIA spends a lot of time working on trade issues, and that's really important. And they're doing it in the Washington power dynamics system, right? They're entrenched in this, pretty complicated. We won't even go into, what it means to change legislation at the federal level. It's really difficult with misinformation. I think a lot of people have been, really lied to, unfortunately, about solar. Now, I'm the first to admit, like, there are problems with the system. There are challenges that, this is not a silver bullet, and I think that is needs to be recognized, certainly. But all the same, I think, making sure that people have really good facts about why this is why renewable energy is an option. So we're looking at sort of, this next 10 years, and knowing that we really do need to scale up pretty significantly. So if we are to kind of hit this 2030 goal, that means that annually we need to increase from what is currently around 25 gigawatts of solar installed per year to more than 90 gigawatts per year by 2030. So if we're on track, we can continue to kind of streamline policies, improve interconnection, improve permitting, siting, those kinds of things, then this goal is attainable. And that isn't just, going to happen with federal investment. It's going to happen with the private sector also really, like, growing alongside it. So that's really where we're headed. I wanted to include this because I think it really interests me. As we look across some of the key solar growth states, but also the traditional coal communities such as Ohio. We are, I think, well poised to add solar significantly, and the data shows that. If we can really get our policies in order so that we can push forward with growth, then I think this state does have the potential to really come in. It looks like third in this next to Florida and Texas as a real solar growth state. Ohio manufactures a lot of things, right? We use a lot of energy. I think the stat is something like Ohio is the 5th highest energy or electricity consuming state in the nation. We use so much electricity to manufacture things, right? We love to build stuff. How can we, meet that electricity goal with alternative fuel sources? How can we get there? I think that's the question we really need to be asking, and I think we're on the right track for that. Yes.
Can you help me understand Texas?
Yeah, I can try to help you understand Texas. So maybe a couple things about Texas that makes it different. And this might get a little wonky, so so we have these regional energy markets. We're in what's called the PJM market. It's a multi-state area where we buy our energy. Texas has its own market all by itself. It's the only state like that. And by having control over its grid and all of the generation within it, it actually has had more ability to grow its wind industry. It uses some hydro, but you know, I think a lot of it has been wind, certainly solar as well.
This is just solar you're showing here, right?
Right, this is just solar here, absolutely. But I think that that's the main reason why Texas, like, they have really been able to accelerate, because they're just like building in a system that they control. In the ERCOT market is what it's called. So that's I think what makes it stand out and act differently. You know, you're not seeing on here states like California, New York, states that have grown their solar industry, you know, or have grown their solar capacity by leaps and bounds in the last decade. These are all places that are like on their way, and how far will they go? You know, I think Texas is really poised to grow there significantly.
Is that expected, based on projects that have been funded yet to be built?
That's a good question. Likely, and this is to span till 2032. So likely the projections are some, you know, projects in a queue, but also, you know, just based on investments that, you know, they're anticipating. Because yeah, I mean, I think in Ohio, we're not seeing, like, I don't think we can reliably say that in the next 10 years, there's enough projects to hit that figure, but I don't know. That's good. And I'll note too, all of these slides are based on information from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration. Wood Mackenzie is the shop that does a lot of this analysis alongside SIA's research team. So that's where all this comes from. So how are we going to do this? You know, this is obviously a massive opportunity, and workforce needs are great. So I think it's notable that currently, well, I guess this is technically last year now, because it is hard to believe we're at the end of 2023. Happy to say, but also just like, what? But you know, it's a sizable workforce. We're looking at just under 300,000 workers in 2022. Notably, these are not jobs that require high, you know, advanced degrees. And one of the biggest growth areas that SIA works in directly is with registered apprenticeship programs. So if you're, you know, interested in, let's say, you know, any job on the installation side of things that, you know, requires understanding how to, you know, design or build and install solar, stepping into an apprenticeship program is actually a really smart way to go. It's a relatively short timetable. The pay is usually decent to great within that field. So, you know, I think that this is really promising, especially for people who have been underemployed or trying to transition out of a workforce or out of a you know, something that may or may not be in you know, a fossil fuel based energy job. Clicking. We're looking at here what job categories there are. You know, actually, I feel like I had one that. Okay. So take it in here that we've got sort of 5 major categories: installation, manufacturing, that's building the parts for solar, sales and distribution, operations and maintenance, and then other. I think it's notable to talk about this operations and maintenance category because this is where it gets a little bit tricky. When a coal-fired power plant is built, it requires an entire workforce just to operate that, you know, that facility. When you build a 10 megawatt solar field, it really doesn't require much of anyone to I mean, you have to occasionally clean the panels, replace inverters, maintain the ground beneath, but by and large, it doesn't require a workforce to the same scale as some of our traditional energy generation systems. So that makes it hard to do this one-to-one transfer, like leave a job at, the nuclear power facility or, something in coal and come straight to solar. That said, there are other positions in other parts of the industry and along the supply chain that people can jump into. So I'll make that point. This kind of gives you a picture of, it's fun. I took this slide from my colleague and she said, yeah, you can take what you need. And I was like, oh, this has like clicking parts too. So, yeah, so you can kind of get a sense that this is a pretty diverse pool of opportunities, whether it's installing the panels, building the panels, systems, sales, development. It's quite a lot. Oh, this is the slide I was hoping to sort of put up, so we get a sense of where these jobs actually are. Notable that we've got a lot of work within this installation and project development that's, I think, only going to grow as projects can come online. Distribution and trade, certainly a large portion of the sector as well. And this has remained relatively consistent as far as, the breakdown of each area by sector. So again, sort of reinforcing this point, we're going to see nearly double the industry as far as employment goes. It's the mega trend of our century, I think, and as far as where jobs will be, it's bound to go in that direction. We're already really on that trajectory. So a stat that points to the workforce tripling. That's a pretty significant driver. And really, I think all of this comes back to how do we do this responsibly, right? I mean, this is such an important moment that we're in now to say, okay, if we really do want to see this growth continue, let's make sure that we do have the policy drivers that are supporting quality, community, strong, like, it's not the way to put it so much as like, to make sure that the communities that these arrays are being installed in, whether that's, the small farms that, are looking at an agrivoltaics operation, like with solar and agriculture crop production underneath, making sure that those farmers have, good compensation, looking at how this growth is managed wisely. That's really the task ahead of us, and something that I think, we each have a role to play in. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. But I would love to hear from everyone. No idea how I'm doing on time. Oh, yeah. So any questions?
There's a couple things in the chat. One, Amy DeLocke, when we were talking about CSP, she dropped in there and she said it's concentrated solar. She uses mirrors to generate heat rather than PV cells. Ivan Pop, I don't know if I'm saying that right, is the largest US installation. And CSP requires very sunny areas, so it's only viable like out in the Southwest desert. So.
In the Southwest desert.
Yep.
And
Cool.
then,
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, and Claudia Lyon, a question in the chat. How do we get PUCO on board with solar?
Yeah, so PUCO is the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. They are sort of the referees might be a good description of their job. You know, they are making sure that rules that apply to the utilities are fair for consumers, those of us who consume electricity. They have a lot of opportunities. I think, relatively speaking, they could likely wield a little more power if they were given the authority to do so, but by Ohio law and statute, they're really limited on how much they can address some of the utilities energy policy that they and I think the PUCO was on, I think, a very positive track to assessing how they can make Ohio's grid a lot stronger, how they can create a stronger regulatory environment for utilities. When House Bill 6, which was a very kind of large scandal that I probably shouldn't spend much time going into, but when House Bill 6 changed Ohio's energy landscape, to put it politically, I think the PUCO really stepped back and did not, their authority to push utilities to do things differently I won't say it was weakened so much as it was maybe muzzled a little bit. So they're an important part of the equation, but what can we do? That's a question I'm not all that sure as to how to answer it.
Sarah, could you explain so Athens buys their energy as a community, right, from a renewable source?
Yeah.
Is that rare, or how many other communities are doing that? And if communities were interested in doing that, what's that take? I mean, I know that our commissioners were really on board and making that happen, and we kind of benefited from that. But
sure, it's fairly unique to Athens. So Athens has what's called electric aggregation, which means all of us who live in Athens and want to participate in the aggregation program have our power bought for us by a council of governments. They shop on our behalf, and our council of governments said, hey, let's buy all renewable power. We don't want to buy just the cheapest power out there, because there's certainly that option for any Ohio energy consumer. You could pick where you buy your power. Didn't know that. It's real. But we chose to buy all renewable power here in the city of Athens. And having electric aggregation, it's actually not as rare as the state of Ohio's had electric aggregation as an option for a long time. Municipalities in Ohio are now adopting it more and more. You see it on ballots regularly at this point, because I think they're starting to realize, oh, this is the best way to do this, rather than individual consumers shopping on their own behalf or taking what's called the standard service offer, what the utilities are offering you as their base rate. Municipalities are saying, let's look for something that's more sustainable for us. So,
or for those individuals who their house or their location isn't suitable for solar, and the upfront cost is prohibitive, but they still want to participate. And you can't participate in an energy aggregate alone, or is that has to come through a community, right?
Yeah. So step one, that community, the commissioners or the governing body of the community does have to vote in aggregation as a option, I guess is the way to put it. And then once that's voted in, then they can shop around and say, this is the supplier that we want. And here in Athens, our supplier is the Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council, or SOPEC. And they shop on our behalf, essentially. So, yeah, and it's been a really successful system and a pretty impressive model that I think a lot of other states have looked at, and other entities within Ohio have seen as like, oh, that's a really good way to go. So, yeah. Groundbreaking. Yeah, go ahead.
So I noticed on the slide where you were showing kind of solar installments per state.
Yeah.
I noticed Appalachia really seemed to be lagging pretty significantly. And I imagine that's, dependence on coal, low income, harsh terrain, things like that. But what does policy have to do to make sure Appalachia doesn't fall behind the rest of the country?
It's a wonderful question and one of my sort of favorite things to ponder, because we are somewhat unique in that we've been such a energy leader as far as a region that supplied coal-fired power for decades and decades, and now how do we lead into a clean energy future? And yeah, I think if you'd asked me this question a couple of years ago, I might be like, oh man, it's really important that, we even like begin to bring the topic of clean energy to our legislators, because they wouldn't even, it was just such a taboo thing to talk about, right? But now it's not. I mean, you see West Virginia like making massive investments in utility scale solar and commercial solar, and it's because I think that they see the economics, right? I mean, it is pure economics. And furthermore, I think because the cost of solar he does that to me all the time, and then I look down and it says everything I just said, and I'm like, now but yeah, it is, I think Appalachia is, I think, really poised to be a powerhouse for renewable energy. And there's been some great initiatives. One that comes to mind is called Reimagine Appalachia. It's a coalition of folks from, a lot of folks from Pennsylvania, sort of Western PA, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia. And man, they are really driving some incredible policies forward, and, driving for fair labor standards, and, some really significant changes. At the same time, we're seeing this petrochemical alley also trying to grow in our region all along the Ohio River. So it's, it's a real battleground, I think. But yeah, I think there's potential for us to really align forces and streamline growth with solar. Just keep trying.
Sarah, we have a couple things in the chat. Elham, who works on our economic development team and professor, and wants to connect you with an MPA grad named Jake Evans. He's really interested in solar, so just wanted to drop that in there. And then Deb mentioned in 2019, I took Jay Warmke's solar installer class near Zanesville, Blue Rock Station. He said everyone is into new construction, but maintenance of PV systems will be very much needed. I'm amazed at how little most electrical companies won't do PV maintenance. He also suggests landscape companies start to offer washing PV systems to keep them running well, adding a window washing like service or snow removal off PVs. Maybe someone here would want to start a solar maintenance company.
I love that. Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's one of the many, horizontal industries that can come out of this. I think if you try to launch one of those in Athens today, you might not have full-time work. But that doesn't, I mean, because it rains a lot and snows, and rarely snows, but you know what I mean? Like, there's maintenance on panels. Yes, it is a critical part of the overall picture of maintaining. It would be silly to not have a strong maintenance schedule for a 30-year system, right? But that it isn't a daily maintenance kind of thing. So yeah, and we are seeing that. I mean, that's absolutely happening industry-wide. There's growth in that. So.
What are you seeing, or how are y'all working on places where you have local resistance to development of large scale solar? So where you see, like, when you drive through, near Utica, or, northeast of Cincinnati right now, you'll see like, little, signs by the road saying like, against solar
No
development,
solar
right?
farm here. kind of
Right,
things,
or like, you
yeah.
know, farms not solar, whatever. How do you, I don't know, how do you work on that, or what does the organization do?
A great question. It's a huge threat to the industry and they see it that way. Me personally, you know, as someone who cares very much about, farms and farming and the need for arable land to be protected, I really think it's valid to say, you know, let's not just take all of our good arable farmland and install solar on it, and yet the way that SIA, SA2 and others who are, you know, really trying to advocate for this, we're saying, you know, there is this middle road, there is this compromise, which includes installing solar on good, you know, flat, open land close to a transmission line, and using that, making sure that the ground soil is still nourished. There's multiple options for that. There's, you know, pollinator habitat, which is sort of should be a given. Make sure that there's something that's growing there that protects the soil. But then there's also, you know, an opportunity for grazing. That's something that is really a growth area. You can have sheep come in and manage that undergrowth. We call that agrivoltaics, I mentioned it earlier a little bit. But, you know, in a place like, you know, somewhere in Southern Ohio where there, you know, are a lot of developers interested in that land, making sure that you advocate for either solar grazing, crop production, or pollinator habitat is a good compromise. It's a really logical compromise. So, but yeah, there's a pretty significant misinformation campaign around the problems with solar, the you know, potential dangers of solar. Some of those claims are pretty unfounded and outlandish and unfortunate because, you know, it's the world we live in. You know, you can find some evidence to back, you know, just about anything, and that's really makes it hard to combat some of these local opposition campaigns. So yeah, I think it's those are the problems. What are the solutions? Continuing to you know, provide fact instead of myth. Having conversations that are genuinely like, what are your interests and how can we support them? I think that that's an important question. You know, if you are a farmer and, you know, you don't want to just see your land taken over by solar panels or your neighbor's land taken over by solar panels, well, how can we address your needs? Like, can there be community benefits built into these contracts? And that's something that's been coming up a lot. Like, if a solar developer comes in and says, we're gonna, you know, put money towards your school, we're gonna help, you know, finance some of your parks or recreation areas. You know, working with each community, what are your needs? How can we address them? That's something that, you know, developers are really able to do that. That makes a difference.
You raise your voice.
Good to see you.
We have seen like there is for those people who are able to be employed in the solar industry, you know, have a degree. So what do you see an opportunity for those mining workers, coal workers who do not have a degree? What do you see an opportunity for them in the transition to solar?
Yeah, great question. If you are looking to transition from a coal-based job to a renewable-based job, there are a lot of good pathways for that you know, are happening across the country. And I really think the strongest among them is this registered apprenticeship strategy. So SIA does a lot with that. You can start with, you know, going through some of their registered apprenticeship training processes. I think, you know, in the era of remote work, I think if you are interested in, you know, retraining and Ohio Needs Jobs and other programs that are like, you know, government-based transition workforce retraining programs, you can step through those processes pretty quickly and be ready to be employed in the industry. And they really are looking like, I know a lot of local solar installation companies that can't find enough talented workers, I should say. That's kind of a gap right now. So it's a smart career move. Jeff, hi.
Hi, thanks so much, Sarah. This is terrific. I wanted to ask, how is the association seeing on the one hand this boom in subsidies and onshoring and stimulating manufacturing employment, and on the other hand, the continued high dependence on mine minerals and processing of them from overseas,
Yeah.
and factoring into geoeconomic, geopolitical competition, part of this, so much of it comes from China. And so on one hand is that onshoring, accelerating mining activities here in the West, and the good and the bad and the challenges with that. How does the association juggle these kind of multi-level questions about supply chain? With good news comes other challenges.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a pretty complex question, and a couple things just come to mind. Like, I know there's been some domestic lithium mines that are under, you know, staunch like scrutiny, and you know, there's a lot of backlash, and communities are saying no, not here. But of course, we know that it has to come from somewhere, and likely it's coming from a country that has fewer environmental regulations and, you know, less oversight. And so that does continue to be an issue. Absolutely. SIA was involved earlier this year in, I guess there are tariffs placed on imported goods, imported modules, but also, you know, you know, component minerals to build modules domestically. And if I remember correctly, it was definitely like hard because the industry says, well, we really want to build a domestic manufacturing system here. We want to be able to make all this stuff in the US, but we can't do it tomorrow. And the demand is so high, we need to continue to buy from China for the next, you know, 3 years, I think was what they agreed to. We need to keep buying from China to meet this demand today while scaling up our domestic manufacturing. And so that's kind of a tough, like, political tightrope for the industry, for SIA to walk, because they're like, you know, we ultimately want this domestic manufacturing to thrive, but we're not ready yet. And so, yeah, I think, you know, the many hurdles in the transition that I think has really been interesting to watch. And but yeah, rare earth minerals is absolutely, I think, one of the thorniest issues that need to be addressed. So
I think we have time for one more question. If anyone has one?
Go ahead. I was just wondering, I was kind of thinking the same thing you were, because I've heard that it's like an issue with the solar panels, getting the raw materials for mining and their conditions the workers are dealing with.
yeah,
Is it possible to recycle panels after they're used or broken?
such a good question. Yes, there absolutely is. They are very recyclable, because many of the component parts are recyclable, and there is a number of efforts underway to build out a PV or solar recycling stream. And whereas, you know, like recycling of all raw materials is challenging, and building an economy and an industry around recycling is difficult. I think in this case, it's actually something that can be done well and discreetly, right? Like if there's a recycling system, and this is kind of what's being proposed and built now, like a system that's 4 modules alone or inverters, which is another big component part of solar. You know, if it's able to be broken down in 1 or more facilities and then recycled and put into use in either, you know, reuse as another panel, or I'm not saying this very well, but you know what I mean? Like, yes, they're big picture here. Yes, that's something that is really a growth industry and something that's coming. Panels last for 25 to 30 years. And really even beyond that, that's like their usable life, and then they start to degrade, but they're still functional after 30 years. And so there hasn't been a whole lot of panels that have been taken out of commission. So it's like something that we're seeing we need to be ready for in the next decade, but today there's not that many that need to be recycled. So it's coming.
Sarah, are you in a rush? Do you have to run? And then Sarah Davis had one more question.
I'm fine. Yeah, no.
It can be really quick. I thought it would be, we haven't talked at all about like brownfield development for solar, and I was wondering if you've worked on any of those projects and at least like say something about how that's happening in some places.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. So just as I think, you know, agrivoltaics is a smart solution for solar on farms, I think brownfield development, developing sites that have been otherwise compromised through industry, is a really wise decision too. That's land that's not otherwise being used for, or cannot be used for, you know, recreation or homes or whatever. Putting those into production for energy makes a whole lot of sense. And often they're located in a good position for, you know, getting onto the transmission grid and all those things. So yeah, I highly support the brownfield development, and I think, you know, so does the federal government. That's a big component or a big tenet of how they want to spend this IRA money. They want to make sure that it's being deployed in these brownfield areas, and they're really targeting that with incentives. So it's pretty clever.
Well, thanks so much, Sarah. Appreciate you
Sure.
sharing this wealth of knowledge on the solar industry with us, and excited to see more development and growth in Ohio and throughout the nation. So thank you all for joining us throughout the entire series. Thank you.
Yeah, and reach out if you need anything, by all means.